Hi guys, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host Indira, and today I'm here with Philip Hurst. He's a senior lecturer in sport and exercise psychology at Canterbury Christchurch University. His research focuses on the placebo effects, safeguarding and doping in sport, and in this episode we discuss the facts, the wider implications of, and even the psychology surrounding doping, including discussion on the new super shoes and their performance-enhancing effects. Okay, as always, please can you give this episode a rating and review if you've been enjoying it. It really helps to give the podcast credibility so I can find you guys the best guests. Okay, let's get into it. Hi, Philip. How are you? Welcome to the podcast.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
No, great having you on. And can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a senior lecturer in sport and exercise psychology at Canterbury Christchurch University. I used to be a runner myself. I ran for Great Britain once, the European Indoor Championships in 2015. Of course, that takes me back from about nearly 10 years ago. And now I'm just a person that enjoys watching it on the TV and maybe go for a little jog now and again or a walk with my dog.
Yeah, sounds well deserved. So definitely.
Yes.
And can you share with us the most significant findings through your research so far?
Oh, good question. Not so sure, I suppose. So I have my hand in quite a few bits of research, but we consider my PhD looked into the placebo effect. So giving athletes a sort of a sugar pill, a placebo, and then telling them that it was going to make them run faster, or another placebo that was going to make them run slower. And what we found was that when an athlete would take a placebo, believing it's going to influence their performance, they would run faster when they thought it was going to help them, and then they would run slower when they thought it would worsen their performance. So that really highlighted to me the significant effect our mindsets can have on performance-enhancing substances, and then also our performance in general.
Yeah, definitely. No, the mental side's something that's coming through time and time again. And yeah, maybe it seems that you just need a strong mindset. And yeah, you can ditch the substances.
Yeah, no, I mean that I definitely believe in that, and I was fortunate to be mentored by Kelly Holmes, and I did give a talk quite recently to about a bunch of 16-year-olds, and I was thinking, do you know who Kelly Holmes is? When I consider it was like 20 years ago this year that she got to 2 gold medals at the Olympic Games. But anyways, I remember her telling us as a group, the difference on the start line. Pretty much when you consider the top level, there's about a second between first and last place sometimes. And she just mentioned that the difference is it's your belief, it's your mindset. That really stuck with me. And she just stood on that start line saying she was going to win. She just had that belief. So her mindset was so important, and I think I would always push that to any sort of athlete going forward, that if you don't believe in yourself, don't believe that you can win, you're already putting yourself in an advantage. So having that positive mindset is really, really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so what's the next biggest goal or thing that you're hoping to achieve through your research?
Oh yeah. I suppose I've got a couple of PhD students who are doing some really lovely work. So as part of my anti-doping research, I'd love to be able to delve into more the use of supplements, whether they actually potentially lead someone onto doping, the risks associated with that. So that's related to the gateway hypothesis, and that athletes that use a protein shake, caffeine, creatine, whatever it may be more likely in the future to go on to dope than someone who hasn't used those supplements. So I'd like to be able to try and delve into that a bit more. The placebo effect is something that I'm so passionate about as well, and we've got some lovely projects related to understanding our athletes' mindsets and how placebo effects can be harnessed, and we can actually make them benefit our performance more. So trying to control that, and then understanding what actually causes these placebo effects as well. So that would be my plan for the next 5 or 10 years.
Nice. No, sounds solid, and yeah, got plenty of time in there to find some interesting stuff, I'd say. And what would you say is your number one piece of advice to athletes?
I think I've said it already in terms of, make anything that you're doing, whether that's your training, your sleep, your nutrition, believing that it's the best thing for you. As soon as you have that little bit of doubt, you start to diminish the effects of that. And that is partly from a placebo effect. So it's harnessing that power and really believing in yourself, the coach that you're working with, the training group that you have, and thinking to yourself, I am the best I can be, and then having fun with it at the same time. So try not to be too pressurized and, enjoying the sport, because as an athlete myself, I'd often get into certain situations where I think this is, really pressurized and it wasn't fun anymore. And I'd always go back, okay, why am I here? Why am I doing this? So love what you do and believe in yourself as you do it, and you'll, have a flourishing career.
Yep, I love that. Love what you do and believe in yourself, guys. Okay, and so let's roll it back a little bit and just expand a little bit more about on your background and how you've got there and kind of the journey that your, I guess, professional career has taken so far. Could you sort of walk us through the various aspects of sort of doping and the surrounding areas that you've covered?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate degree and master's degree at University of Sunderland, where I focused on placebo effects. And then I decided to do a PhD and was fortunate enough to get a scholarship at Canterbury Christ Church University. And that's when I started to do stuff around anti-doping. So between 2013 and 2018, I completed my PhD and really delved into the anti-doping side of things and looking to educate athletes about the sort of the anti-doping procedures, rules, regulations, things like that. And around about 2015, 2016, I became an anti-doping educator. So for UK Athletics, I will often give talks to a lot of athletes. If you've ever been on the sort of the DICE program or the ACE program, what it was a few years ago, I would have often educated them, be it the English schools and things like that. And today, just continued my research, was able to get a lectureship at Canterbury and managed to do my research in that area.
That all sounds really great. And so I think first things first, if we could maybe talk a little bit about what is doping.
So by definition, it would come under the World Anti-Doping Agency. So that was what governs all doping or anti-doping. They have a prohibited list, which essentially says these are the drugs that you are not allowed to take. And they set the rules essentially to all sports, no matter what level you're at, no matter what age you're at. As soon as you take part in a organized event, you are part of the anti-doping rules. So that may not just be about taking a drug. It's also related to the drugs testing procedure. It's related to knowing if someone else is doping. It's supplying drugs. So it's not necessarily taking a substance, but it's knowing about it as well. So there's 11 anti-doping rule violations, and that's what everybody is governed by, whether or not the athletes that know about it are aware of that. And I think when I reflect back on myself as an athlete from 2007 to around about 2012, rarely knew what the anti-doping rules were, but I was implicitly under the rules with that. So any tournament or competition I would go to, then I was under those anti-doping rules. So those are what we abide by, and that's what we must follow as athletes. So comes back to basics. A basic definition would be taking a substance on WADA's prohibited list. So that could be like an anabolic steroid, amphetamine, human growth hormone, EPO. The list is quite long, so that's what we'd be following.
Okay, excellent. No, that's a really great summary there. And in terms of doping and performance enhancing, obviously these substances which are banned have some element or degree of enhancing an athlete's performance. But where does the line kind of come between things which might naturally enhance performance versus substances which are considered too much of a performance enhancer?
Yeah, so the World Anti-Doping Agency have a panel of experts, and they determine what is on the prohibited list and then what isn't on the prohibited list. So in terms of natural and unnatural, most of the substances that are on the prohibited list are generally things that we naturally create in our bodies already. So something like erythropoietin or erythropoietin, EPO is the kind of the Lance Armstrong drug. That's naturally produced in our body. So we produce that through our sort of red blood cells, our bone marrow, and that would increase our red blood cells. Now, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we were able to synthetically manufacture EPO. So that would increase our natural resources of EPO in our body. So it's a tricky question in terms of what's natural, what isn't that natural. But essentially, it's something that the World Anti-Doping Agency panel decide is a risk to the health, a performance enhancer, or a sort of a risk to the spirit of sport. And it must hit 2 of those 3 criteria. So with EPO, for example, it's a risk to an athlete's health because it increases red blood cells, the sort of the hemoglobin in the blood. And if you have too much of that, then that can cause cardiovascular issues related to coronary heart disease, strokes, things like that. So that's highly dangerous. It's also a performance enhancer. So the more red blood cells you have, the more oxygen you're able to deliver to the muscles, and then you're able to run faster for longer, essentially. So tick those 2 boxes straight with EPO. And then that third one is a sort of a little bit more subjective in terms of the spirit of sport. And this is what's deemed to be sort of the intrinsic values of taking part in sport. So it's about respecting your opponents, respecting the rules, having fun. Those are sort of the values within it. And if a drug is suggested to violate that, then that would be deemed something like that. So EPO potentially would increase your advantage over your participant. So it would say, okay, that's going to be on the prohibited list because it violates the spirit of sport as well. So in that sense, it seems quite easy to do, but then it can get a bit tricky with something like cannabis. So cannabis is a banned performance substance, but there's evidence to say that it isn't bad for your health. It isn't performance enhancing, and then would it be a risk to the spirit of sport? So because it has to hit 2 of the 3 criteria, a lot of researchers, athletes, stakeholders would then argue that it shouldn't be on the prohibited list, but it is, and this is then when it gets a little bit contentious. So it's a little bit grey in that respect with those types of things. So the World Anti-Doping Agency panel deem it banned, and that's what they state should be on the prohibited list. So that would be where the answer would come.
Well, no, that's really interesting. And to follow up kind of on the EPO there with the increase in the increase in red blood cells, what if someone's body naturally produces higher levels of something, or for example, altitude training, which can increase red blood cell count? How does that then get screened in terms of testing and, knowing what the cause for perhaps our elevated levels of, say, red blood cells are?
Yeah, so we're talking about 25 years ago now. They used when EPO became quite prevalent, especially in cycling, there used to be a rule that I can't remember the term now, you had a 50% hematocrit level. That's what you needed to have in terms of the volume of red blood cells to what you have in your body. So naturally, I think on average around about 40 to 45% is what we would have, and the higher that is, the more volume you have. So some athletes would generally have very high levels, and the cycling agency at the time, UCI, proposed a ban. If you're over 50%, then you're obviously cheating. So you had to then prove that you weren't cheating and take regular blood tests to show that this is your natural level. They now have a test for it. So we can now test for EPO in our blood. And that is the more fundamental. But the argument then to say, you have higher red blood cells, you're at an advantage than over others. Well, you could argue that, Usain Bolt is the fastest sprinter because of the amount of fast twitch muscle fibers, for example, or, his reaction time or whatever it may be. That is his natural ability. That's what you have naturally. So then you're starting to question, Michael Phelps has, bigger feet. He's able to swim fast. I think that was Michael Thorpe who was so good at that. Or, I don't know, some other sort of genetic things that make up. It's just generally what you're born with. You're a good runner. I was able to run. I'm not a very good, well, he said, I was a good bobslayer, so I never was able to show that. So that's kind of the line between, naturally enhancing your performance versus taking a substance to then alter your performance to an extent. So I think that's really tricky to sort of draw a line under.
Yeah, no,
and
definitely.
The second part of your question as well, sorry. I know one was unnatural. What was the second one?
Oh, I think I was just kind of touching on how it could be screened for, but I think you covered it really. Just in terms of, if someone's test results were to come up higher, but that's just because they were naturally higher or they'd gone to altitude and used that
Yeah.
to increase their blood cells.
Yeah, so we have something called the athlete biological passport as well. So not just drugs testing related to anti-doping, you'd have the athlete biological passport, which essentially you people like I'd imagine Laura Muir, Dina Asher-Smith, you Josh Kerrs might be getting screened quite on a regular basis in terms of how much blood their blood profile essentially, so they're able to track that over a season. And say it just suddenly spikes right up, then you can say, okay, something's gone on there that's unnatural, and then you may target test them. If you go to altitude, it's probably not going to happen that high. So there's methods in which we can access to help that. But again, according to the World Anti-Doping Agency, they don't see that as something that's potentially dangerous or something against the spirit of sport. So athletes that live in Kenya, for example, have an advantage over people in the UK because they're able to train at a high altitude to increase that oxygen their red blood cell count compared to us. So we can access that, and that's just something deemed safe and for the spirit of sports, so it seems okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely a debate there that could open up as well, I guess, in terms of sort of hormones and, the Caster Semenya case and her being deemed to have had, too high levels of testosterone. But then if that's something she was naturally born with, it definitely does get complicated there. And yeah, what's the sort of I guess situation in terms of hormone doping and that side of things?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with the literature on that. I know it's very not so pop. It's very in the news in terms of athletes potentially, I don't know, changing their gender as well to be able to get that advantage and other thing in women's sports. So I'm not too familiar on the subject, and yeah, can imagine it may get abused. So hopefully the organizations in place are controlling that best they can.
Yeah, definitely. And so at the moment, what are the kind of common ways or the most seen ways that athletes are currently doping, especially maybe female athletes within running?
I'm not quite sure in terms of common, the methods that have been used for years in terms of the anabolic steroid use and the testosterone use is probably where female athletes are going to get the most benefit in terms of the lower levels naturally that females produce compared to men. So, you go right back to the 80s with the East Germans and the number of the prevalence of anabolic steroid use then, you could really see the difference in performance from a female perspective in terms of the strength that would allow, the hypertrophy to the muscles, the recovery also that would give. So in terms of that, what's generally happened now is you'll often get athletes taking lower doses to try and avoid the drugs test. So if you take testosterone in a lower dose, then it may not come up in a drugs test, and then you're able to sort of what we call microdosing. So that would be potentially some of the ways that female athletes in particular might be trying to get around that. Yeah.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's really, really difficult, I guess, to capture something like that. And I guess in terms of capturing or observing doping, you see it sometimes where medals are reallocated maybe 10, 15 years after the event. How is it that these drugs tests are, or at least the doping's coming to light so long after the actual event?
Yeah, so they always say that the drug cheats, if you want to put it into those words, are always ahead of the testing. So a really good example is Dwayne Chambers and part of the Balco scandal in 2004, 2005. And what he had was essentially a new performance enhancing substance that the World Anti-Doping Agency had no idea about. So that it's really tricky, I suppose, for the World Anti-Doping Agency to put in place a test for a drug that they don't know exists. And because of a whistleblower, in terms of someone coming forward and telling the organization what was happening and what had happened, that was then able to put in place the test for that to occur. So sometimes in that instance, it takes a while for the testers to catch up because they're trying to find what athletes are actually doing. It's getting better. I mean, there's not necessarily that many new drugs coming out that World Anti-Doping Agency don't know about. And this is why there's other rules in place, as I mentioned right at the beginning, in terms of doping. Isn't just about taking a substance, it's also knowing about it. It's administering it. It's stopping someone from talking about it to the authorities. So that's what the World Anti-Doping Agency is trying to do now, is to say, okay, if you know someone is doping and you don't say anything, you're complicit in the process and you're going to be banned as well because of that. So that then encourages people to come forward to say, actually, I've seen something at my club, or I've seen this athlete doing this. So I think you need to investigate that further. And that has then caused things like Russia to be exposed. As I mentioned, Dwayne Chambers, Lance Armstrong, the biggest anti-doping cases are pretty much related to whistleblowing and people coming forward and exposing that. So the drugs test is one thing, but it's more so to do with the community that we're involved with and making sure that we're taking part in a sport that is fair. And that is our collective responsibility as a group of athletes.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And yeah, I guess it's not normally just the individual athlete who does it alone. There's normally a whole team around them. And I guess there's some cases sometimes that come out where athletes claim they were unaware that something was a banned substance. What does that mean then for the athlete if, for example, the support team or coaches were giving them something which turned out to be a banned substance?
Yeah, now I'm just going to talk from an 18-year-old and over perspective. Under 18, then it becomes a little bit difficult in this instance due to sort of the rights of that athlete and whether they have responsibility in that case. They do, but I'll talk about an 18 plus year old at the minute. So we are under the rules of strict liability. So no matter what is in your body, it is your responsibility of an athlete to know what's in there and how it got there, even if you didn't intend to do it. So if your parent, for example, your 18-year-old athlete, your parent starts to slip you some pills, which is unfortunately has happened in the past, and the athlete didn't know they'd taken it, they could still be banned for up to 4 years potentially for taking that. They would then have to be able to defend in a court of law what had actually happened to them for them to reduce their ban, because essentially they're still competing with that banned substance in their body, and that's when it becomes really difficult. So if coach is giving it, if doctor's giving it, then yeah, it comes back down to the athlete. If an athlete goes to the doctors, is prescribed a medication, and at the minute I'm taking loads of medication that is actually on the banned substance. I'm taking a substance called pseudoephedrine, and that is, if I was to compete today, I would be committing an anti-doping rule violation. That's why I don't compete anymore. I can do that. But pseudoephedrine is on the ban list, but I can go. I've got it right here. Actually, is it here? Yeah. Oh no, it's not this one. This is like Lemsip or something like that. Has pseudoephedrine in it, and if you were to take that, you could fail a drugs test, even though you just went to the Boots pharmacy and picked it up, or your doctor prescribed you it. So these are the things that athletes need to be aware of, that no matter what goes in their body, they need to make sure that they know what it is, if it's banned or not, and checking it through various resources. Things like Global Draw is probably the best resource when it comes to checking your medications. If it's an under 18, then it becomes a little bit tricky. So they still would be banned because they're under the rules of sport. And name escapes me, but there was a case of the Russian figure skater who was it was a gold medal. She won the gold medal, but she had been doping, and she was banned the next day. And then that becomes a real case of, okay, whose responsibility is that? Is it the athlete who's been, given medication from her doctor, her coaches, her parents? She gets banned, but for how long is the question, and that then gets opened up to interpretation, and it's part of court law. But essentially, all athletes are under the same rules, and no matter how it got in there, you have to check and make sure that it is what it is, that you know what it is.
Gosh, yeah, that would be a tough one if you were being slipped pills without knowing it. That would be unfortunate for the athlete. And that brings me on to two further points, really. And the first is kind of medical, and when you are being prescribed something that is on a banned substance list. And I know there's been lots of controversy sometimes around, say, inhalers and stuff. And then the second point to discuss would be, I think, common household or pharmaceutical, I guess, medicines or supplements which are on the ban list. I mean, mentioning Lemsip and stuff there, those are, quite easily brought over the counter. So I guess if we start with the medical side of things, how does it work when an athlete is or does need to take something that does contain a banned substance?
Yeah, so in that instance, the athlete would need to request a therapeutic use exemption or a TUE. So you consider things like ADHD medication. Ritalin would be on the banned list. Insulin is a potent substance that actually benefits performance, but if you have diabetes, then you need to be taking your insulin. There's no getting around that. I'm just trying to think of other examples. Yeah, maybe you went to hospital and you were injected saline, and you're only allowed, I think it's up to 90 milliliters of saline to be put into your body. If you take more than that, then that's a banned method. So in those instances, you would need a therapeutic use exemption. And in that case, what we have in the UK is really good. A really easy resource is that you would simply just go onto the UCAD website, type in TUE, and they have something called the TUE Wizard, and you just follow the steps on there, and it just tells you whether you need a TUE and then how you are able to obtain one. So that's so straightforward. I don't know if you can, I can send you a link and you can put that on
Yeah.
website, whatever it may be, on your Instagram and place like that if people need to access it. That's so straightforward. We're really fortunate in this country to have a really structured and anti-doping organization that are there to support us. So in that instance, it's really good. So yeah, if you need a substance that is on the banned list, you've checked it, went, oh God, I'm taking it, then just go to the TUE Wizard and that will help you out there.
I'll be sure to, link that down in the description below, guys. And to follow up there with the TUE exemption, in terms of drug testing, am I correct in thinking that it is anonymized when they get the tests in from the athletes? And if a substance is found, then they're able to go back to the athlete and team who can say there's a TUE in place here. But if it's anonymized and done in that respect, does that mean that someone could have a TUE for one medication but then take another medication on the banned substance list, or how is that controlled?
Yeah, I mean, any substance that you take, you'll need a TUE for it. So it's not just you get one TUE and then you don't take anything. If you have ADHD medication like Ritalin, you're taking insulin, you'll need a TUE for both substances. When the athlete is getting drugs tested, then they need to then put forward exactly what they're taking and then say they have a TUE in place for it. So that will go onto the form. It's still anonymized, but it's on the form to say, okay, we're looking for this. They've got the TUE and they're able to check it back, even though it's all anonymized. So in that instance, it should be no problem. The World Anti-Doping Organization has a real systematic procedure in place that should be the same throughout the whole of the world. When you get drugs tested, I say that it should be the same. So it should be okay with something like that, as long as you have the TUE.
Okay, yeah, that's cool to hear. And also on the note, in terms of that, if someone's taking medication, say insulin for diabetes or Ritalin for ADHD, I guess the performance enhancing side of that, what can kind of be done then to mitigate the impacts of that, or how does that work? Because they'll still be getting the benefits there, I guess.
Yeah, and again, this is just the system that's in place, and athletes are going to abuse that. You mentioned things related to the inhalers. I know that was so popular, 10 years ago, when every athlete seemed to have asthma. I don't necessarily there's any way around that. I think athletes are going to try and take advantage of that grey area and say, okay, I need to get a TUE, but it is really difficult to get a TUE. If you're going to be taking a medication, you really have to show that you actually need it. So if I say it's really difficult, it'll be difficult to get approved if you don't have the underlying condition. So it's not just about someone signing it off, a doctor saying you need to have it. It's going to go to UK Anti-Doping and they're going to check it first. Then it gets sent to the TUE committee, who are going to make a review it and ensure that they actually need it. And then you need to have around about, I think, 2 doctors to prove that you have the condition. So it is more difficult, I'd say, now to actually receive a TUE. And I remember I was part of a meeting, and they were saying how many TUEs were approved I can't remember how many in the year, but essentially it was something like 7 in the case of a year. Out of the hundreds of applications that were given, they're rarely accepted, because more often than not, when an athlete needs a TUE, needs a medication to treat a symptom or an underlying condition, there's probably another medication to use that isn't on the banned list. So they would say, okay, you don't have to take this, you could take this substance instead. And that would be potentially something that they would do instead.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And if we move now on to kind of common household or over-the-counter substances or medicines that people could be taking that are on the ban list, what are some kind of common ones that perhaps people might not realize do actually contain a banned substance?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, pseudoephedrine is probably the big one. We always talk about, this time of year, I've been suffering with a cold, definitely since New Year. And I've been taking pseudoephedrine pretty much all the time just to get me through the day, that type of thing. That's something that needs to be checked. There's probably more out there. I know, salbutamol inhalers one that you're only allowed to take so much of it. So I don't have my inhaler here. I've got asthma, but I think if you take too much of an inhaler in sort of an 8-hour period, then you could be potentially doping. So with that, it's making sure that they're not taking too much. All I would say, the advice to give is athletes need to check whether the medication they're taking is banned. So if they go into Boots Pharmacy and they go, oh, I need this for my cold, or I need this for a headache, I've got an ache or pain or whatever it is, I'm going to take this medication, they need to go to a website called Global Draw. So this is the Global Draw website, and it's generally so straightforward. They would go to Global Draw, as I've just Googled it here, Global Draw. Go to the United Kingdom, because that's where we're from. If you're from these other countries, you can use that then. It comes up with a sort of a user type. Say you're an athlete, what sport you need to we're in. So it's nice being in athletics. You can just hit right at the top, search your athletics, where you purchased it, and in this instance, let's see if Lemsip is on here. Lemsip, cold and flu sachets. Okay, I've used that. Accept. It comes straight up, and then it's telling me that it's okay to be used in this instance. So here it's telling us you're fine to use that. However, let me see if I can. This is when I'm going to show how bad I am. Oh no, there we go. Pseudoephedrine, for example, which is in a lot of medications, comes up with an X. So you're saying here this is actually prohibited. You're not allowed to take this in an in-competition period. Now, not to get too technical, but your in-competition period starts 11:59 p.m. the day before your competition. So if you're competing at 3 o'clock on a Saturday, your in-competition period starts Friday 11:59 until you finish your event. That doesn't mean, though, that you can take this medication at 11:58 p.m. or the day before, because if it's still in your system, you will fail a drugs test. So always make sure that if a competition is coming up, for example, you do not take any medications that are on the prohibited list. Just avoid it. It's okay to use out of competition, so say during your training period or things like that, but in competition period, this is banned. And you can do you can search for anything in this, paracetamol, you can search for, and it will tell you it's okay, and ibuprofen. So this is probably the best resource for any athlete who is competing to make sure that what medications they're taking, it's there. Hopefully you can see that. I don't know if you do the audio as well, but that's hopefully fairly straightforward to use on Global Draw.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll link that down below. And if I can get the video on, then I'll insert it here as well. So no, thank you for sharing that. And I guess to maybe wrap up on the more technical side of things then, what are the kind of potential dangers to an athlete's health or long-term impacts to athletes who might dope?
Yeah, so this is debated. I know I've got my scientist hat on now. We don't necessarily have the evidence to really show that the substances that are on the banned list are bad for our health. It's due to the fact that it's unethical to do the research, to give people, say, a course of anabolic steroids in the same dosage that athletes would be taking. you are potentially going to put someone's risk at health. So we don't necessarily have the evidence, but we do know from anecdotal evidence, cross-sectional research, the history, what's occurred, is that actually if athletes are taking these substances, there is a risk to their health. You know, if you're going to take a course of anabolic steroids, it may have some cardiovascular effects. That's going to increase your chances of a heart attack, a stroke. Testosterone may have the same instances. EPO, which was abused in the early 90s by athletes. They were taking so much, their blood got so thick that when they were during their sleep, they had a heart attack because their blood couldn't actually go around their body. So you'd actually have instances of athletes waking up in the middle of the night just to exercise and allow their blood to sort of get put through the heart and not to clog up. So there are definitely significant health risks with these substances. And I believe in the World Anti-Doping Agency that they are probably quite health risks, and that's why they're on the on the banned list.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Definitely something to steer clear of. So,
Yeah.
And you mentioned how the placebo effect is, a key area of interest for you, and the impacts around, the fact that maybe performance enhancing substances may not be as performance enhancing as some athletes think. What are your views around things such as caffeine tablets, paracetamol, ibuprofen that some people do take before competing?
Yeah, anything that someone takes has got a placebo attached to it, placebo effect attached to it. And not just caffeine and protein, electrolytes, whatever an athlete's taking, even anabolic steroids, EPO, testosterone, all have a placebo effect. And if a substance is on the banned list, there's a bigger placebo effect associated with that. So if you believe that something's going to enhance your performance, you're more likely to experience an improvement in their performance with that. So with something like any substance, like a supplement, I would really argue that the benefits that athletes think is going to improve their performance, how much comes from the supplement itself? And take something like caffeine. I'm giving you a classic paper by Chris Beatty in 2006. They gave athletes a placebo and told them it was going to be caffeine. It was going to be a moderate dose of caffeine, or it was going to be a high dose of caffeine. And they did 3 trials. And in the first trial, the athlete would take the substance, and if they believed it was a moderate dose of caffeine, they went faster. If in the next trial, if they believed it was a high dose of caffeine, they went even faster. And then if they thought it was just a placebo, they went slower. And what the high dose of caffeine showed is that when you took the caffeine, believing it to be a really high dose, they went 3.1% faster than when they didn't have the placebo or the caffeine. And that is the same improvement in performance to what is actually shown with caffeine itself. So just believing you've taken it shows the same benefits in performance as actually taking it. And that's what I did for my master's dissertation. So I used what's called the balanced placebo design. And I gave athletes caffeine on one trial and told them it was caffeine. On the second trial, I gave them caffeine, but told them it was a placebo, so it wouldn't do anything. In the third trial, I gave athletes a placebo, but told them it was caffeine. And then in the fourth trial, I gave them a placebo and told it was a placebo. Now, when you got caffeine and knew it was caffeine, you improved by 1.8%. When you got given a caffeine but told it was a placebo, you only went faster by about 1%. But then when you got a placebo but told it was caffeine, you went to the same level of performance as actually taking caffeine. They went 1.9% faster. So what that demonstrated to me was that it didn't matter whether you took caffeine or placebo. If you believed it was going to be caffeine, you went faster regardless. And that just demonstrates to me, is it the caffeine improved performance? Is the supplement improved performance? No, not really. It's the belief that you've taken it. And I think that really demonstrates the power of our minds. Again, we talked at the start, and whether athletes actually need to take these substances to improve performance and maybe look at other methods that are more sustainable.
No, that's really, really interesting to hear, especially about the placebo effect being a very similar, almost same percentage as the actual substance itself. And you mentioned how that increase in placebo for more, I guess, enhancing substances is greater. Is that potentially because the athlete's body knows what that more enhancing substance would provide them? Or do you think there's any mileage in it being that the athlete's able to recreate the experience because they've taken caffeine before or they've taken EPO before?
Not necessarily in terms of whether you've taken it before, because you'll still have it, you'll still get a placebo effect even if you haven't taken it, but the fact that it gets put on the banned list automatically enhances the belief in it. You think, oh, it's on the banned list, it's got to be improving my performance. There's also a lot of sort of talk around steroids being very good, really performance enhancing, EPO being, really advantageous to Lance Armstrong. I mean, I'm not saying here that all the benefits are placebo effects. I'm just saying you get a bigger psychological benefit by taking it. And whether or not the placebo effect is larger than the actual effect of the substance, I'm not so sure. But I'd say it's a large contributing factor. So what you'll get is you'll get the benefits of a substance, say that's a 1%, and then you could also get the benefit of the placebo effect, which could be, I don't know, 2%, 1%, 0.5%, could be anything like that. So you're also getting the benefit of the drug and also the benefit of the placebo effect. So together could equate to a 2% improvement in performance. So that would then argue how much of a benefit is coming from the drug, how much is coming from your mindset. And as an athlete, that's something then to weigh up. Are you going to risk failing a drugs test for that tiny percent improvement performance when you could potentially get that through looking at other things related to your psychology? If you increase that belief already, you're going to hit that ceiling and close that gap much more so than just trying to take a drug.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I guess in terms of kind of doping and taking performance enhancing substances, what do you think primarily leads athletes to do that in the first place?
I suppose naturally I'm inclined to say, just trying to win, trying to beat an opponent, get a gold medal, break a world record, the fame, the accolades, those are going to be driving forces, definitely. There's going to be other things, and they're classed as sort of tipping points. Sometimes an athlete may take it to recover from an injury. Someone may have trained for, 9 months of the whole year, or let's take an Olympic cycle, train for 3.5 years to get to the Olympic Games. And then all of a sudden, tears a hamstring or like has a muscle strain. If someone said to them, okay, you can take this substance and it's going to help you recover and get back to your baseline, your normal performance, someone would say, actually, yeah, okay, I've done all the hard work for this 3.5 years, and I'm just going to take a substance to get me back to where I was. That might actually seem quite reasonable in someone's mind. And so that might lead someone to take drugs. There's social pressure in terms of teammates taking performance-enhancing drugs, where they say, I'm using this, I'm getting better, you should also use it. People might get dropped from the team. They might be trying to get into a Great Britain team or a national team, to saying, okay, if I take this drug, it'll just allow me to get into there. Sponsorship, things like that. So there's all these other factors that are there. And some people might just want to get better. Some people might just say to themselves, I want to know how strong I'm going to be. I want to know how fast I can be with the aid of performance enhancing substances. Because would you argue there's a difference between taking an anabolic steroid and then having access to altitude training, heat acclimatization, the best nutritionist, the best psychologist? All of these things are supplementing their performance, and a performance enhancing substance is a thing to have in their armory that they can say, well, what's the difference between a super shoe and a performance enhancing substance? Is it the health side of things? Is it the safety? Again, it's a gray line in terms of, is it the shoes, is it the drugs, or is it me who does that?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a really interesting, I guess, kind of area to unpack there in terms of things and aspects which can contribute to enhancing athletes' performance. And I suppose on that note, do you see higher rates of doping in athletes who are less supported or from less financially well-off positions?
Yeah, we don't know the evidence, what classes the prevalence of doping, just because it's so difficult to discover. Asking someone if they take balance performance and substances, everyone's going to say no. Well, most people say no, I don't do that, even though they might be doing it due to the stigma, and then they might get banned, etc. So you'd argue that in recreational, levels, amateur levels, people who are just on that cusp are probably more inclined to do it than say someone who has a lot more to lose. So yeah, you probably think so, that there's probably more chance of someone taking a substance because they're probably taking a substance at that level because they're probably less likely to get drugs tested as well. They haven't had the education around it. They have less to lose. So maybe on that cusp, that's probably when they may be more likely to take these substances. But I'd say it's prevalent throughout all levels, or it's likely to be prevalent throughout all levels in that instance.
Yeah. And with the kind of increase in recent years, I guess, with the availability of protein powder and various supplements, and earlier you mentioned how people who use supplements are more likely to go on to potentially dope in the future. Because of increased rates of people maybe taking supplements now, do you think that doping rates will potentially increase in the future?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, what frustrates me is that we often go, it's the medicalization of sport. I think I was a little bit old school in my own running, that, I used to never wear a watch when I'd go for my easy runs and my long runs. I just wanted to see how I felt, no heart rate monitors, nothing fancy, just go out and run, just to really understand your body. Now we seem to attach ourselves to everything external, whether that's a watch, your shoes, your foam roller, your massage, your electrolyte drinks, and then you start thinking, okay, can I take the caffeine? Should I take my ibuprofen? Should I then go on and use an anabolic steroid? It's all part of these things that you're attaching to yourself that aren't necessarily coming from you. And I think that's a real mindset to tackle with, is especially from a coach perspective, a doctors, a physios, anyone who can inform an athlete, is okay, if you're telling an athlete they need to take something, or they should be using something, what message is that sending out? And it's really considering what can they do internally that is in their control, that's sustainable. When I say sustainable, something that is going to be long lasting. So I would always say going to bed at 10 o'clock and waking up at 7, 8 o'clock is going to help your recovery more so than taking a protein shake. Over and above, hugely. People neglect those side of things. Having a really focusing on your diet to make sure you have the carbohydrates, your protein, your fat, all your vitamins and minerals that you need, the timing. If you can perfect that, that's really going to be so much better than, again, taking a protein shake after your session. So that's what I'd like to try and push in terms of a message, to say you don't need to use these supplements. Whether or not that then leads to bigger rates of doping, probably not. I think it's probably been the same for the last 30 to 40 years. I don't think it's changed much. I think there's always people out there who want to use these substances, who want to use substances to enhance their performance. So not necessarily. I say no in that long-winded answer.
Yeah, no. Really interesting to hear. And I guess, yeah, we're coming to the end of our time. So, a few things to kind of close on now. But you mentioned earlier with the super shoes as well, which is definitely, a really hot topic at the moment. Do you think the mindset, and I guess, is there a placebo effect associated with wearing super shoes in the same way that there is with substances?
Yeah. Ask yourself the question, who makes the super shoes? So what comes to mind first?
I guess the manufacturers like Adidas, Nike.
Yeah. What's their job? What's Adidas and Nike aiming to do?
Sell as many as possible, make money.
So if you look, I mean, I looked at Kipchoge wearing them, you see the 2-hour attempt and you think, wow, this guy is good, he's fast. I want to do the exact same thing he's doing. And that in itself is all marketing. The placebo effect is marketing. It's being able to sell something to someone so they believe in it. If people didn't believe in Kipchoge, if people didn't believe he was as good as he was because of the super shoes, they wouldn't be buying them. They wouldn't, if you ran something like 2:05, those shoes would not be selling. Because he ran under 2 hours, they're like, these shoes are amazing. And of course, there's an engineering aspect to it. Definitely helps. But again, how much is going to benefit the athlete? I hear athletes using them for their, their longer runs or their intenser sessions, their big races. That's when they're getting used. Once you put those shoes on, there's an importance to that. And that's then going to enhance the belief to think, okay, I'm going to run well today. I'm going to run faster today. I'm going to be so much quicker, or I'm going to recover better. Tomorrow I can run so much harder. Again, there's a psychological component there where you say to yourself, I've used these shoes, it's going to help me. So I would definitely say there's a placebo effect associated with that. And what makes me laugh even more is they're like £300 and they last half the time as the usual shoes, because then Nike and Adidas go, get in. You then have to buy another pair. So you go through them even quicker to then buy another pair, to then do it.